Alright, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast. BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Well, for a while, I've been mentioning that I wanted to get back to the case of Maura Murray. Like when we would do updates on this channel, just kind of like what's going to be coming up in the future, I would always say that I wanted to do something about Maura Murray, a case which I followed a lot back in 2015, but just didn't exactly get around to it. However, though, we've now seen more than 15 years since Maura Murray went missing in February of 2004. The exact date would be February 9th, 2004. Of course, she went missing in Haverhill, New Hampshire after crashing her car into a snowbank. But of course, Maura was a student at UMass Amherst in Amherst, Massachusetts. If you're listening to this, you probably have somewhat familiarity with the case, and this is part of, many uploads that we've done on Maura Murray here on this channel. So we won't go back and rehash all of the details geared toward people who are somewhat more familiar with the case. One of the things, though, that has been provided for us is the episode of Disappeared about Maura, and I was rewatching that just recently, trying to get back in touch with all of the details. And when you examine the case of Maura Murray from that perspective, I had a few things to say about it. The first thing was I thought that they were very much downplaying Maura Murray's mental duress, kind of just these sort of mental problems that she would have been experiencing. They did mention, though, that she's a person who had 2 car crashes in the span of just a series of days, a number of days. She had 2 car crashes, of course, crashing Fred Murray's car, Fred Murray being her father, crashing her father's car into a guardrail, and then crashing her Saturn into the snowbank that led to her disappearance. And the thing with that is that enough to just make someone really just kind of like lose their shit? Possibly, for most of us average human beings. But when you listen to stuff like the Missing Maura Murray podcast, which was something I followed for a little while, I got about 30 episodes into it, then I really kind of took a disliking to it, and not so much that there's anything wrong with the presenters, it's just that you couldn't follow it too well because they kept changing the information. They were saying, okay, we told you this one time, but actually this is what really happened. Numerous details like that, like it was Fred Murray who told Maura to put a rag in the tailpipe of her car. Okay, so he didn't actually say that, here's what really happened, and they kept sort of just having to go back and revise everything, which to their own credit, they're just trying to get it right. I mean, when you're talking about this stuff on podcast segments, even like this one, it's difficult to get everything right the first time 100%, but when you're kind of just someone on the other end, when I was just, a fan just listening to their show, it's very difficult to follow, and it's definitely difficult for us to think about the case in any sort of armchair detective way, or just someone who's trying to compose a theory about what happened, or just to understand what was going on from a human perspective, like, what's really happening? Well, they kept changing the details and having to revise a lot. One of the things, though, that I thought the episode of Disappeared did rather well, though, as opposed to, like, downplaying the kind of mental duress Maura was experiencing, they highlighted a lot of things about kind of trying to show some different insights into Maura Murray's character. I think that this case attracts a lot of people because we know so much about what happened to Maura Murray before Route 112, before the car crash, and absolutely nothing happened afterward. I mean, there are potential sightings. There's the possibility that a woman saw Maura Murray with an older man. There is the possibility that, some people have even written in saying that they think that Maura Murray was sighted in Canada, multiple sightings in Canada, and a certain true crime author who wrote a book called True Crime Addict might have been fueling the fire on that one. Don't want to say his name, give him any more attention, but he might have been fueling the fire. But I would read on forums, like someone's even writing in saying that they saw Maura Murray in Quebec, and like they said hello to her in the store. You're reading that on a forum, and you're like, oh my gosh, this thing is blowing out of control. But one of the things, though, that they did was they had a friend in there, not Kate Markopoulos, but Liz Druziak, who was saying that Maura Murray once went to Boston on her own. She just left school and she just took the train to Boston by herself, and then she came back. There was no real disappearance going on with that one. But they're trying to say that Maura was a very adventurous person. She was also somewhat daring, and it wouldn't have been so abnormal for her to take off on her own, and especially if she's going to be calling hotels and resorts, especially perhaps Bartlett, New Hampshire, or Stowe, Vermont. That wouldn't have been that out of place for her. And even the whole concept of Maura's fabricating certain things about the family emergency, even though no such emergency existed, all of YouTube was running wild with that. They're like, what? No such emergency existed. What could have happened? I can tell you what happened with that. Maura Murray was 21, and when you're 18, 19, 20, or 21, sometimes you say things like that because you don't want to go to college class. I mean, that's just what happens. You make an excuse because you don't want to go to class. And sometimes, and perhaps in this case, she was doing it with good intention. She was just trying to get away from this for a week. They used the expression clear her head. She was trying to clear her head for a while. But I that never sat well with me too much. I always just thought it was more about, she was kind of like what her friend said, the adventurous, daring type who was like, I want to go do something else, something more along the lines with that. Or there are a lot of problems with here. You could say get away from it all for a week. And we do insist upon a week because they also mentioned that Maura disappeared February 9th. She had plans to go to a Dane Cook comedy show on February 12th, which was in Connecticut. However, though, the way they kind of presented that on Disappeared was that was something that she had talked to her friends about. I don't believe that was like a completely set in stone plan, but that was something that she had talked about. There were, I guess you'd say in the process of making that plan. And once again, if I've missed anything, people feel free to correct me in the comments section. But the thing is, though, it doesn't really seem that out of place for Maura Murray to just get into her car and drive toward New Hampshire, drive toward Vermont, drive toward Bartlett. These things didn't seem that bizarre. And it also really goes to show that the mystery here with this is much more focused on what happened to her. In the very first upload on Maura Murray that I did, I cited Fred Murray during the publicity video that they did for this, the Maura Murray missing video, when he says that they believe that a local dirtbag snatched her because the dogs lost her scent 100 feet from the wreck. All right, if the dogs lost her scent 100 feet from the wreck, that means she most likely got into somebody's car. And for the longest time, I thought of something to the contrary. For the longest time, I was like, Maura probably started running. She had a bottle of Kahlua with her. We know that much because of the receipt. And even though there are conflicting reports about the alcohol that she brought with her, Maura had a bottle of Kahlua with her, and she could have gone into the forest and just sort of started drinking by herself. That is a possibility. There's very little physical evidence to support that. There are no footprints leading into the woods near the car crash. I mean, they would have noticed that. And I mentioned that too because I was like, do I have to bring up my old line again? Maura Murray was a 21-year-old woman. She was not a hamster. She had the awareness that if she walked in the snow, she would leave footprints. So it's like, she's trying to avoid the police. And that's just one of those things that happened. One of the theories, though, is that Maura, as a cross-country runner, could have started running for a while, and when someone is running, that increases the possibility of freezing to death. Then she just entered into the woods after running for a while, started drinking, and just kind of gave up, succumbed to the elements. Or, we're talking about just like sitting down next to a tree or something like that, and that's the end. The only problem with that is no physical evidence to support that. All we can say is the dogs lost her scent 100 feet from the crash. what would be a higher likelihood that Maura entered somebody's car? Well, when we have search dogs, they often function on moisture that is in the air. Following true crime cases, maybe you've heard this stuff before, they keep the scent in the moisture in the air. It's like the scent is preserved in the moisture that is in the air. But when it is below freezing, and we're talking about February in New Hampshire at night, when we're dealing with that time, below freezing, then it makes it difficult for the dogs to differentiate between the different scents. It makes it more difficult for them to recognize what one scent versus another scent. Granted, though, of course, the dogs would have been able to go out at a time that was most likely above freezing. And then we also have Fred Murray's statement again saying that the glove that the dogs were given was a Christmas gift that Maura had actually received on, of course, December 25th of 2003. So that would mean that he doesn't even know if she wore it that frequently. He's not even sure if she wore it a single time. He thinks that might have been a contributing factor. I don't personally believe that myself based on what we've heard about dogs. And these search dogs are very precise. They can even detect the scent through water. Like if there's a body, underwater, they can detect that stuff. They're very, very sensitive and very, very strong. Okay, so that's the evidence we have, though. The dogs lost her scent 100 feet from the site of the accident. She most likely got into somebody's car. Was this the 112 dirtbag Alden Hals Olsen? I don't think so. That guy is a troll. He was a troll, and he's just someone who wanted to get some publicity on the internet. He's a disgusting person. That's all we can say about him. Now, it's very possible, though, that Maura did get into a car with someone who did something very destructive to her that ended her life. I've said very clearly, though, I don't know why people are pushing the opportunistic serial killer thing. It doesn't have to be an opportunistic serial killer. It's very possible that this was just some guy that picked her up. An altercation could have taken place. He demanded sex, she said no, and some accident happened and Maura's life was ended. It could even be something if she's in his house or something. Maybe he pushed her, she hit her head on a coffee table or something like that. It doesn't have to be an opportunistic serial killer. Not ruling it out. It's just, it doesn't necessarily have to be someone who is targeting women so easily. There could be a wide variety of possibilities about Maura Murray getting into somebody's car and ending up dead. So this is very relevant, though, if you're just going to be only looking at serial killers that could have operated in the state of New Hampshire at that time. It doesn't have to be that way. But the thing is, though, one of the ways that this case can be solved, because this is an update, one of the ways that this case can be solved is just if somebody encounters skeletal remains, which would most likely, I personally believe, going with the theory that Maura was murdered, it most likely they'll be found in some obscure place in some way, somehow, DNA could tie them back to Maura. That might be one of the only ways that she will be identified. We just covered the case of Amber Tuckerow on this channel, a woman who disappeared in Canada for a while, and some hikers actually uncovered her remains. They had thousands of tips that came into the police department. They had an audio recording of the alleged perpetrator's voice. The last call of Amber Tuckerow, very, very popular on YouTube, but that stuff was not really helpful to identifying her. It's just all of those tips really did not produce that much. It was just some hikers came across her remains. And if we're going to be dealing with the case of Maura Murray, especially 15 plus years now, 15 and a half years almost at the time of this recording, you would really be having talk about somebody would just be digging up a piece of New England and they would encounter some physical remains of Maura Murray. Also, they did mention, though, the possibility that if they find the backpack or something like some sort of hard evidence that Maura could have been carrying that possibly would have recognized that she died in the woods. As of this date, that physical evidence has not surfaced. Therefore, I'm really starting to go with the theory that Maura was murdered, not succumb to the elements, although I still entertain it as a high possibility. Even on the disappeared episode, they said some of the exact same conclusions that we had said on this channel, ruling out suicide, ruling out the tandem driver theory. I mean, the tandem driver theory is that Maura was trying to escape Massachusetts and start a new life somewhere, that she was trying to run away. It ties into so many different things, like the Patrick Vassy incident, where they believe that Maura ran over student Patrick Vassy at UMass Amherst, and that was the trigger for this incident, that she crashed her car on purpose, and another car, possibly a red truck, drove her into Canada. She's going to wait out the statute of limitations on a hit and run and then come back into America. It's just like highly improbable. And like, I do say this though, like, to the credit of researchers like John Smith, I mean, when they actually go through the timeline stuff, they try to really show that it's very unlikely. It's not just saying, hey, that's a wild idea I don't want to listen to. I mean, they've actually gone through some of these things and they're just like, this is rather improbable. Or like based on the timelines. Not to mention though, like the Patrick Vassy scenario is contingent upon Maura leaving on a 15-minute break and driving us in a kind of a weird route, running over Patrick Vassy and being back at a certain time, when it's just a very narrow window of possibility and it's just very unlikely. But I think that it shows a lot more insight about this disappeared episode, and this is the thing we can talk about with an update. This isn't really some case that is going to be blown out of proportion, sensationalized in a lot of ways. This is more about a girl who was adventurous, she was daring, she was bold, the kind of person who gets on a train and goes to Boston by herself for a day without telling anybody, and they're like, hey, where's Maura? Well, she's the kind of girl who would get in her car and drive to New Hampshire without telling anybody, hey, where's Maura? Very similar scenario. But one of the things that we have to remember is, if you are ever in a car accident, leaving your vehicle has a much higher likelihood of leading to death. And these are the things we've heard from true crime cases. The disappearance of Maura Murray, the disappearance of Brandon Lawson. And I was even listening to that one channel, what was it called? Real Creepy Stories or something. It's hosted by that guy Ranil. And they were just saying, like, what's going on with all these cases about people disappearing after crashing their car? Well, here's what happens. If people leave an accident and they walk away from their vehicle, there's just a higher likelihood of death or more serious injury, more serious accident. It's just a statistic. It's a statistic we have to deal with, where it's like, well, someone's car will run out of gas, someone will crash their car, they think, oh, I can just walk to this place, and they're just going to kind of walk through a rural area, a wooded area. Risk of dying is so much higher. And that's kind of one of the statistics that we're dealing with in the case of Maura Murray. You see this a lot, though, when we follow cases. Also, people who are disoriented around bodies of water. When you have so many true crime cases, just deal with that. Someone was disoriented around a body of water and they drowned. In the case of Maura Murray, someone got into a car crash and she left the scene of the accident, and it turned into something more problematic. Oh, just to drop a quick note about the rag and the tailpipe in Maura Murray's car. I don't think there's too much about that. I believe that Maura Murray placed that there herself. I mean, I'm not sure what the missing Maura Murray guys have said about that. Once again, I no longer listen to their podcast. But, I mean, I don't think there's much of a mystery there either. She got into a car crash, second one in a small number of days. The rag came from the emergency kit in Maura's car, like in the trunk. I believe she just put that there herself to distract people from the wine that was in the Diet Coke bottle, just to distract people from anything associated with drunk driving, because she didn't want to get in some serious trouble for that. So, that's one of the things that we have going on with Maura Murray. What do you think happened to Maura Murray? What do you think about the theory that she was murdered by what Fred Murray called a dirtbag? Do you think that Maura Murray died in the woods? Also, though, we have one thing to say about that. One guy left a comment on one of my uploads once, and he was like, why would somebody enter the woods when it's so dark, you can't see your hand in front of your face? Why would they have any sort of motivation to do that? And that was like, the only things I can think about that would be exhaustion and giving up on life and just drinking yourself into oblivion. But still, at the same time, why would someone enter the woods like that? What do you think happened to Maura Murray? Was this a murder? Was this an accidental death? If you have anything to say at all, please drop a comment below. And until next time.